I wanted to take a few minutes to start writing some code in Visual Studio. I know we've had some issues with internet access and videos and things like that, and with the Microsoft account, but those should all be fixed now. And remember, in both course sites and in an email that I sent out the other day, you should have the login information for the Microsoft account, the username and the password. So if you check the announcements for this week, it's January 3rd's announcement, I believe, and also I think I sent a copy of that announcement to everyone via email. You'll see the username and password for the Microsoft account that you may need depending on the setup of Visual Studio on your computer. I also sent the link out for the home free community version of Visual Studio. If you want to get that, you're not required to. I just provide that in case you want to install that at home. So you're going to go to your Start menu, and somewhere in your Start menu or either on your desktop, there should be a shortcut for Visual Studio. You may have a more recent version than 2015, which is what I have, but the bottom line is you should be able to find Visual Studio in your startup menu or in a shortcut on the desktop or in your programs menu, and you should be able to open it. I'm going to double click here, see if it'll let me open this. It can take a few minutes for Visual Studio to start and fire up. So in the meantime, if you don't know how to find or start Visual Studio and you've watched the video that I posted again this week, I believe on January 3rd, it's on YouTube, and I also put a copy of the video inside course sites so you can watch it. If you still have trouble finding Visual Studio, then let Mr. Hamilton know, and if he doesn't have a way to find it, then he can get Mr. S in there to help you guys find it. So between the video, which you can watch multiple times, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. S, you should be able to find Visual Studio and open it, given the username and password that I set up for the Microsoft account. So once Visual Studio opens, and if you're like me and you clicked on it multiple times, if you end up with multiple Visual Studio instances or windows open, you can close one out to save on memory on your computer or not. But the bottom line is, once you get Visual Studio open, your screen may or may not look like this. You may have a different welcome screen appearing. So in order to make sure that we can all get to the same place, no matter what your screen looks like, you can always go to the File menu. Now, that being said, if it prompts you to log into a Microsoft account, again, you've got to go to Monday's announcement in course sites or check your email from Sunday night or early Monday, where I emailed you the username and password for the Microsoft account. Generally, you do that one time and you never have to do it again, which is why it's not popping up here for me. But the bottom line is, no matter what your welcome screen looks like, go to the File menu and let's go to New Project. And sometimes Visual Studio takes a while. It's a memory intensive program. Now, you've got several different things here that may or may not be visible. So if you've got something like this, then you're going to go to Installed. You're going to go to Templates. There are other languages available. C#, C++, SQL Server, JavaScript, Python. So you have other languages that you can use in this tool besides Visual Basic, but we always want to make sure that we are choosing under the Visual Basic menu, because the syntax for each language is different. So the code for Visual Basic is not going to run if you've accidentally selected, say, C#. So we're going to go to Visual Basic, and we're going to go to Windows and click on Windows, and notice we get several options over here. So you're actually going to want to make sure you click on Windows, or if yours look like this, you could actually click on Windows Form Application here, but I generally drill down here and I'm going to choose Windows Form Application, not any of these others, but Windows Form, because that's what we're creating. Your typical application that you're used to dealing with is a form-based application, and we're working in the Windows environment, so this is a Windows Form Application, and those will be what we'll be developing throughout the course. So again, in theory, you could select it from here, or you can come down here, make sure you click on it one time to highlight it. Just take the defaults here. Notice it tells us we are doing a Visual Basic type. So a project for creating an application with a Windows user interface. And that's what we're doing. We're going to write code that creates an application, a software application, and it's going to have your typical Windows user interface. Now, if you take the default name, which you're welcome to do, every time you do a project, Windows is just going to call it Windows Application, and if it's your first project, it's going to put a 1 on there. If it's your second project, it's going to put a 2, a 3. You can do that. If you do that, do not later save it with a different name, which I think I showed in an earlier video, but that will really break the project. So whatever name you put here or leave here is going to be the name of the project. The problem with using Windows Application 1 is that it's so generic that if you keep taking the defaults and I say, okay, go back to the program where we were simulating rolling a dice, you're not going to remember if that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 15, or 20. Which project was it? So that's the downside to taking the default name, but you're welcome to do that. And again, whatever you take as the name right here, whether you take the default or you put your own name in, do not change it later. It will break the project. You'll have the option to do a save as and rename it, but do not do that. So if you forget and take the name Windows Application 1, that's fine. It might just, you just have to, if I tell you to go back to a project, you may have to look at each one. The other thing is, if I give it a more descriptive name, so let's call this Hello World. Give it a more descriptive name. The next time I come in, the default project name is going to be back to Windows Application 1. So depending on, I just say that so that you won't think that it doesn't remember your other projects. When it goes to do the default name, it scans the directory, sees if there are other Windows Application named projects, and it bumps the end number up by 1. So if we rename it with other things, each time we come in, it's going to say Windows Application 1 is the default. That doesn't mean you've lost any work or anything. So here we're going to put Hello World, and I'm going to click OK. And I'm going to have to give it a minute because it's going to change the look a little bit of the IDE once I do that. So this right now is sort of a general background for the IDE because it doesn't know which language I'm going to use. But once I tell it I'm using Visual Basic and then I want a Windows Form Application, it comes over here, and in the toolbox now all of a sudden it is populated with all the things that I can use, that I can put on the form. We call these objects, button objects, etc. You'll notice I also have a Solutions Explorer. We'll use that a little bit, not so much though. And most importantly are the toolbox and the properties. Those are the most important things we'll work with. The properties allow us to manipulate how something looks, whether it's the form itself or buttons or labels. We have all of these things that we can set. Now we can also do this in code, but it's a little nicer and easier if we do everything we can through the properties menu and save the things that we really need to change as the application's running for the code. So anything I set here in the properties when the application starts up and the user sees it, these are the things that when I manipulate them, this is what the user will see. If I change a font here, when the application runs, the user will see the text in that new font. Whereas if I change it in the code, they usually have to do some action in order to fire off the code that changes a property. So wherever possible, we're going to set our properties here. Now they're a default set so that if I did run this, there's nothing on the form, it's just a blank form. If I did run it, I would be seeing all the default values that are in the Solutions Explorer. And for some reason my run window is not popping up, or actually it's just taking a while. So when you want to debug or test or just get an idea of how something is going to look, you can press the play or run button from the menu. And so right now, this is, if I were to turn this into something I could take home and I ran it for people, this is all they would see, which makes sense. I haven't done anything to the form. So you can see the default caption for the window is Form 1. That's set in the properties by Microsoft as a default. The size is defaulted and all of that good stuff. So I'm just going to click X to exit out, and it's going to bring me back to the IDE. So anytime you're wanting to see, to preview how your project's going to look, you can always use the Start or Play button in order to run the project. And this is on this menu bar that we have across the top here. And on one of the menus here, I can't remember which one, but that's also an option on one of the menus as well. But notice, remember I said that it was going to default to have the caption at Form 1? That is because in the Properties window for the form, which by default Microsoft has named Form 1, it has a text value of Form 1. This text property, the value in this property, is what controls what appears here. So I can change that. If I type Hello World in there, now to be on the safe side, I'm going to come to the File menu and I'm just going to do a Save All. Now here is where it is going to give me the option to change the name of the program, and where you will be tempted when you realize that you took Windows Application 1 as the default, you will be tempted to come in here and change it. That generally breaks the project and it will not work. So don't do that. Just go ahead and take the default name. The other thing is it tells you where it's saving it. Now mine defaults to my hard drive because I'm not hooked to a network right now. And it will create this directory if it doesn't exist. You may want to browse to your network directory, your school drive that is personal to you, that you can access from any computer. So you may want to change where you're storing this. And the reason I say that is if you leave it on the hard drive and then you change computers, you don't have the project because it's not physically on the computer that you're sitting at the new computer. It's physically on the hard drive of the old computer. So if you put it on your network drive and you have to change computers, you can always get to it. The other thing is, if something happens to that computer and the hard drive goes and they replace it, and you had all your work specifically on the C drive, the hard drive of the computer, you've lost all your work. And it's just good practice to put it on a network drive because then you always have it, the network's backed up. If something happens and that disk in the server goes bad on the network, they've got a backup. So when they put the new drive in, they'll restore everything so you won't lose things. So I encourage you to save it somewhere, create a Visual Basic folder or do something to save it on your school network drive and not on the hard drive of the computer. And the solution name is Hello World. I generally just let that match the form name, and then I will click Save. And I encourage you every